The command deck of Humanity's Vow was bathed in the soft, cold light of distant stars, the calm before the storm hanging heavily in the air. Captain Mark Callahan stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space displayed on the main view screen. Around him, the crew moved with quiet efficiency, their faces tense but focused. There was no chatter, only the hum of machinery and the occasional clipped command. Vorik, the Union High Counselor, stood beside Callahan, his reptilian eyes scanning the flurry of activity. Despite the layers of authority he wore like armor, an undercurrent of anxiety tugged at him. The war games were about to begin, and though the Drass had agreed to the terms, Vorik couldn't shake the feeling that they had underestimated the enemy's hunger for destruction. Callahan's calm demeanor only deepened Vorik's unease. The human seemed almost too composed, his confidence bordering on recklessness. Yet there was something about Callahan, something in the way he held himself, in the quiet resolve of his voice, that suggested a mind working several steps ahead. "They're here," Callahan said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, steady, but with a hard edge that sent a shiver down Vorik's spine. On the screen, the Drass fleet appeared, their ships emerging from the shadows like predators. Their dark hulls gleamed with a cold menace, bristling with weapons that could tear through the Union fleet in moments. They were beautiful in their lethal simplicity, designed for one purpose: to conquer. Callahan turned to Vorik. "This is it. You've prepared your people." "As best as we could," Vorik replied, his voice betraying the fear he tried to suppress. "But I still don't see how we stand a chance." Callahan's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We're not here to win a traditional battle. We're here to show them we're not afraid to fight back." Before Vorik could respond, the intercom buzzed. "Captain, the Drass commander's ship is hailing us," reported the communications officer, her voice tight with controlled anxiety. "Put it through," Callahan ordered, his expression hardening. The view screen shifted, displaying the imposing figure of the Drass commander. His gaunt face and sharp eyes exuded a predatory calm, a contrast to the swirling tension on the Union ship. His gaze flicked over the bridge crew before settling on Callahan. "Captain," the Drass commander began, his voice a low, measured rumble. "We are ready to begin the war games." "Are you?" Callahan didn't hesitate. "We are. But let's be clear, these games aren't just about proving our strength. They're about proving our resolve." The commander's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint in their depths. "We shall see if your resolve is enough to keep you alive." The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in an oppressive silence. Vorik exhaled slowly, trying to steady his nerves. Callahan, however, remained unfazed, his gaze returning to the stars. "Are you certain about this plan?" Vorik asked, lowering his voice to ensure the crew wouldn't overhear. "If we fail." "We won't fail," Callahan interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "We've studied their tactics, their patterns. They're efficient, but predictable. We use that against them, and we might just survive this." "Might." The word hung in the air like a death knell. Vorik knew Callahan was right. They had no other choice. But the reality of facing the galaxy's most feared species, in a test of both strength and will, was a burden almost too great to bear. The crew continued their preparations, the tension rising with every passing moment. Vorik could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. He watched as the tactical officer finalized the ship's battle plan, the holographic display flickering with the positions of both fleets. The Union forces were outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmaneuvered. "Not yet. Signal the fleet," Callahan ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We move into position. Everyone knows what to do." Vorik nodded, taking a step back as the bridge crew sprang into action. Commands were issued, and the ship rumbled as the engines roared to life. On the view screen, the Drass ships held their formation, waiting, watching. There was an eerie calm to their movement, a predator's patience. Callahan turned to Vorik one last time. "We've got one shot at this. If they break through our lines, we fall back to the asteroid belt. Use the environment to our advantage." Keep them off balance. And if that fails? Vorik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Then we fight them to the last ship, Callahan replied, his tone grim. But we won't go down without making them bleed. The High Counselor swallowed hard, nodding. He could see now why Callahan had been chosen as humanity's representative. There was a cold fire in the man, a determination that was both inspiring and terrifying. As the fleet moved into position, Vorik allowed himself one last glance at the stars. They were on the brink of something monumental, something that would either end in their destruction or forge them into something stronger. The battle had not yet begun, but already the lines were drawn, and Vorik knew that whatever happened next would change the fate of the Union, and perhaps the entire galaxy, forever. The void of space crackled with tension as the Union fleet held its formation, awaiting the inevitable onslaught. On the bridge of humanity's vow, Captain Mark Callahan watched the tactical display with unwavering focus. The Drass ships, a dark swarm against the backdrop of stars, began to advance. Their movements were deliberate, their formation tightening like a noose around the Union's forces. Steady, Callahan commanded, his voice calm but laced with steel. The crew responded with disciplined precision, their faces masks of concentration. Each knew what was at stake. This was more than just a battle. It was a fight for survival, a test of their species' resilience. High Counselor Vorik stood nearby, his gaze flickering between the view screen and the crew. The Drass were relentless, their reputation well-earned, but there was something different in their approach this time. They weren't just attacking. They were testing, probing for weakness. Vorik couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was yet to come. They're closing in, the tactical officer reported, his hands flying over the controls. 5 seconds to contact. Callahan's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. The Drass ships were faster, more heavily armed, but the Union fleet had one advantage: adaptability. Humanity had learned to fight in ways the Drass had never encountered, ways that defied the rigid strategies of their enemies. Execute evasive maneuvers, Callahan ordered, his voice slicing through the tension. Keep them guessing. The Union ships responded instantly, breaking formation and scattering like a swarm of insects. The Drass, momentarily thrown off, hesitated, just as Callahan had anticipated. It was a small victory, but in this battle, every second counted. Vorik watched in awe as the Union fleet danced around the enemy, their movements unpredictable, almost chaotic. Yet beneath that chaos was a calculated strategy, one designed to exploit the Drass's overconfidence. Callahan had turned their greatest strength, discipline, into a weakness. The Drass, however, were quick to recover. Their ships adjusted, adapting to the new tactics with frightening speed. They regrouped, their formation tightening once more as they prepared for a full assault. Here they come, Callahan muttered, his grip tightening on the armrest. The view screen flared with light as the first Drass salvo struck, energy beams lancing out toward the Union ships. Shields flared, absorbing the impact, but the sheer force of the attack sent shockwaves through the fleet. Return fire, Callahan ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. The Union ships responded in kind, unleashing a torrent of plasma bolts and torpedoes. The void between the two fleets erupted in a storm of destruction, ships on both sides reeling from the exchange. Vorik gripped the edge of the console, his eyes wide as the battle raged. The Drass were relentless, their ships shrugging off damage that would have crippled any other fleet. But the Union forces were holding their ground, their resolve as unyielding as their captains. "Captain, we're taking heavy damage on the port side," a voice called out, panic creeping into the edges of the report. "Divert power to the shields and reinforce the line," Callahan replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "We hold this position." The ship shuddered as another volley slammed into the hull, but the shields held, barely. Vorik's heart pounded in his chest, the sheer scale of the conflict overwhelming his senses. This was no ordinary battle. It was a brutal, grinding contest of wills, where every decision carried the weight of countless lives. And then, through the chaos, Callahan spotted an opening. A gap in the Drass formation, small but exploitable. It was a risk, a gamble that could either turn the tide or spell their doom. "Target that breach," Callahan commanded, his voice sharp. "All ships, concentrate fire on those coordinates." The Union fleet responded as one, focusing their firepower on the vulnerable point in the Drass lines. The effect was immediate. A Drass cruiser buckled under the assault, its hull tearing apart in a cascade of debris and flame. The breach widened, and Callahan seized the moment. "Advance!" he shouted, his voice ringing with authority. "Push them back!" The Union ships surged forward, pressing the attack. The Drass, caught off guard by the sudden offensive, faltered. Their formation began to break, the disciplined lines unraveling under the relentless pressure. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though victory was within reach. But Callahan knew better. The Drass were wounded, not defeated, and a cornered predator was at its most dangerous. "Brace yourselves," Callahan warned, his voice grim. "This is far from over." As the Union forces drove the Drass back, a new threat emerged. One that neither Callahan nor Vorik had anticipated. The Drass fleet, adapting to their tactics, began to shift, their movements becoming more erratic, more desperate. They weren't retreating. They were repositioning. Callahan's eyes narrowed as he recognized the maneuver. It was a feint designed to lure them in, to draw the Union forces into a trap. But it was too late to pull back now. The Drass sprung their trap with ruthless precision. From the darkness of space, a hidden squadron of Drass warships materialized, flanking the Union fleet. Their sudden appearance sent shockwaves of panic through the ranks as alarms blared and screens lit up with warnings. Captain Callahan's eyes narrowed, his mind racing to grasp the full scope of the ambush. They had underestimated the Drass, and now the consequences of that miscalculation were becoming painfully clear. The enemy had anticipated their every move, herding them into this precise moment. "Evasive maneuvers! All ships, break formation!" Callahan barked, his voice carrying an edge of urgency that was impossible to ignore. The Union fleet scrambled to obey, but the Drass assault was relentless. Beams of searing energy sliced through space, tearing into hulls and sending several Union ships into catastrophic explosions. Vorik stood frozen at his station, the weight of their impending defeat crushing down on him. The scene before him was a nightmare come to life. Ships torn apart, their crews lost in the cold void, all because they had dared to stand against the Drass. Yet, amidst the chaos, Callahan's resolve remained unbroken. His mind raced, searching for any tactical advantage, any way to turn the tide of battle. The trap was closing in, but he refused to let it consume them. "Focus fire on the lead Drass ships," Callahan ordered, his voice sharp and decisive. "We need to create an opening." The Union ships, battered but not broken, redirected their firepower with a renewed sense of purpose. Explosions blossomed across the battlefield as the concentrated barrage found its mark, crippling several Drass vessels. But the Drass, undeterred, pressed their advantage, their ships closing in with deadly intent. Vorik felt a chill run down his spine. The Drass were tightening the noose, and he could see no way out. But then, as if answering an unspoken prayer, a burst of static crackled over the comms, followed by a familiar voice. "This is Valiant, coming in hot. Hold the line." Callahan's eyes lit up with recognition as the Union's reserve fleet, led by the battlecruiser Valiant, burst into the fray. The reinforcements charged into the heart of the battle, guns blazing, their sudden arrival catching the Drass off guard. The tide of battle shifted once more as the combined firepower of the Union fleets began to turn the ambush against its orchestrators. "Form up with the Valiant," Callahan commanded, his tone filled with renewed hope. "We're not out of this yet." With the arrival of reinforcements, the Union forces rallied. The Valiant led the charge, cutting through the Drass ranks with brutal efficiency. The Drass, caught between two fleets, began to falter, their formations breaking under the relentless assault. But the Drass commander was not so easily defeated. From his command ship, he watched the battle unfold, his expression cold and calculating. He saw the tide turning against him and knew he had to act quickly. With a swift command, he ordered his remaining forces to converge on the Valiant, aiming to destroy the Union's last hope. Callahan recognized the danger immediately. The Drass were concentrating their fire on the Valiant, hoping to break the Union's spirit with a single devastating blow. If they succeeded, all would be lost. "Shield the Valiant," Callahan shouted, his voice carrying the weight of desperation. "Protect it at all costs." Union ships moved to intercept the Drass, throwing themselves into the line of fire to shield the Valiant. The battle reached a fever pitch as the two sides clashed with ferocious intensity. Ships exploded in blinding flashes of light, and debris filled the space between the fleets. As the Drass closed in on the Valiant, Callahan knew they had one final chance. He quickly scanned the tactical display, searching for the perfect moment, the precise alignment needed to deliver a decisive blow. "Now," he ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "All ships, fire on the Drass flagship." The Union fleet unleashed a coordinated barrage, every ship targeting the Drass commander's vessel. The Drass ship's shields flared under the assault, struggling to hold back the overwhelming firepower. And then, with a blinding flash, the shields collapsed, and the ship was torn apart by the onslaught. The destruction of the flagship sent shockwaves through the Drass fleet. Disoriented and leaderless, the remaining Drass ships hesitated, their once impenetrable coordination shattered. "Press the attack," Callahan urged, seizing the opportunity. The Union forces surged forward, driving the Drass into full retreat. The trap had been sprung, but it was the Drass who were now ensnared. As the last of the Drass ships fled into the void, Callahan allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Drass had been beaten back, but they would return, and next time they would be even more dangerous. Vorik, finally able to breathe, turned to Callahan with a mix of awe and gratitude. "You did it, Captain. We survived." Callahan's expression remained serious. "This was just the beginning," he said quietly. "The real test is yet to come." The victory had been hard-fought, but Callahan knew they had merely delayed the inevitable. As the crew began repairs and tended to the wounded, he couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister loomed on the horizon. And in the silence that followed the battle, the void seemed to whisper of greater threats yet to come.